So what this report does is it focuses on water shocks, dry shocks, and wet shocks, episodes that are too dry or too wet. And surprisingly, what we find is that the dry shocks matter a lot more than the wet shocks. And part of the reason why the dry shocks matter so much is that they're less visible. So they're the silent emergency. They're like misery in slow motion. Because they're silent, people don't notice them. The aid doesn't come in. It ends up doing a lot more damage than a flood might do. So that was one somewhat surprising result, that we found that the employment and income effects in cities from a drought were much more severe than a flood. Another rather surprising finding was that, of course, when droughts descend, we know that agricultural productivity will decline. But there's a spillover effect into the forests, and this leads to greater deforestation and forest clearing. And that's a new result, because even though there's been so much work done on the drivers of deforestation, we hadn't prior to this identified droughts as being potentially one of the drivers of deforestation. And that's a worry, because if droughts induce deforestation, we are destroying our carbon sinks, we are worsening climate change, we're going to get more droughts, and we could well be spiraling down in the long term. So we need to worry about that and find ways of trying to address that. And then finally, and perhaps in some senses most significantly, what we find is, particularly in Africa and rural Africa, when droughts hit, quite obviously there's less food around. There's less food for children and for infants. And when an infant is deprived of food or has a bout of sickness, she or he does not grow to her full mental potential or her full physical potential. So we know that. And then we have data to track this child 20, 30 years hence, and we find that she's not only poorer, but she has less education, and even her children are less healthy as a consequence. So this is where a rainfall shock in infancy becomes not only the destiny of a woman, but the destiny of her children, which is really quite a tragic and devastating finding. So we try to inquire what sort of policies work. And we argue quite forcefully, because basically we don't find too many things work in these circumstances. So we argue very forcefully is what these poor countries need are safety nets. So when the drought hits, there's some money or there's some food that goes out, so at least the children can get fed and don't suffer these episodes of deprivation, which then lead to missing out on your growth, with implications that last for a generation or more.